went down 30%, and we went back to work again. But we're doing the same thing, same thing that the Japanese have been doing for a couple decades, propping up bad debt. And that's the most difficult thing that we have to deal with, is allowing these mistakes to be corrected. Now, these ideas have floated around
Mr. President. I would ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I would ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
We have been dealing with an issue that relates to China's currency policies, and I know that's been the pending business, but I've been wanting to address another issue for a number of days now, and just haven't found the time till just now, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. It is an issue that a number of people here on both parties are very concerned about. It relates to Syria. So I rise to talk about the situation in Syria, which is a place of ever-increasing violence, and it has taken the lives, this violence has taken the lives of some 2,000, or I should say more than 2,600 Syrians. I spoke before, a number of months ago, at a hearing about a Pennsylvanian. His name is Hassem Halak. He's a doctor who lives in Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia, in the suburban communities. And his brother, Sakir, lived in Syria and visited the United States for a medical conference earlier this year. Upon his return to Syria, demonstrations against the Assad regime were beginning to intensify. Sakir was not engaged in politics, nor did he want to be engaged in politics. But despite this, he went missing and was soon found dead in a ditch in a village south of the town of Aleppo. Sakir was subjected to unspeakable torture before he was killed. His visit to the United States was enough for the Assad regime to target him for death. So his brother, a constituent of mine, Hassem, has asked me to do everything I can to support democratic change in Syria and to protect civilians who continue to be haunted by and hunted down by this brutal regime. I believe, and I know this is a broad-based point of view in this chamber, Democrats and Republicans alike, we believe that now more than ever, it's critical that the international community, led by the United States, and the United States has done a lot already, but needs to do more, that we show support for the Syrian people who continue to live under this dictatorship. The Syrian people, especially the democracy and human rights activists, feel defenseless against the tanks, the guns, and the bullets of the Assad regime. The United Nations Human Rights Council passed an important resolution which called for the deployment of 3 human rights monitors to bear witness to the terrible crimes in Syria. I was very disappointed, and I know others were as well. But unfortunately, we weren't surprised to see that Russia and China vetoed a UN Security Council resolution just last night. This resolution had been watered down so much that observers have been taken to calling it the so-called monsoon resolution. Yet the Russians and the Chinese still refuse to recognize the terrible actions of the Assad regime and show support for the embattled people of Syria. I'm an original co-sponsor of Senate Resolution 180, which was introduced in May. This resolution expresses support for the peaceful demonstrations and universal freedoms in Syria and condemns the human rights violations perpetrated by the Assad regime. This bipartisan resolution has 25 co-sponsors, but it's been held up by 1 United States senator who will not let us pass through by unanimous consent. The language we use around here for letting legislation pass without a vote, without a roll call vote, so-called unanimous consent. 1 senator holding up a resolution to show our solidarity with and support for the Syrian people, who have been living through the most horrific of nightmares, torture and killing and abuse for all these months. Mr. President, there's a lot that we can do and that we should do. And there's also a lot that we should be debating here in the United States Senate. But I can't understand, on an issue of such importance, that we cannot come to consensus on something this basic, to show fundamental solidarity with the people of Syria, especially at this hour. We cannot let another day pass without the United States Senate expressing its outrage over the behavior of the Assad regime. It's not enough just to condemn it in words. It's very important the United States Senate goes on record to pass this resolution. Now, I've spoken in the past very highly of Ambassador Ford and his team in Damascus, our ambassador from the United States to Syria. And I was proud to support his nomination. Instead of conferring legitimacy on Mr. Assad and his regime, Ambassador Ford is the most high-profile opponent of the Assad regime, sending out regular condemnations through press releases and Facebook postings. But what has been even more impressive is the personal courage demonstrated on an almost daily basis that Ambassador Ford and his staff have demonstrated in traveling throughout the country and engaging directly with the democratic opposition in Syria. Just last week, Ambassador Ford met with the leader of the opposition National Democratic Gathering in Damascus. Ambassador Ford's vehicles were attacked, and he was forced to stay inside the building until security forces arrived 3 hours later to escort him from the premises. He attended the funerals of human rights activists, observed the aftermath of government massacres, and engaged directly with the people of Syria. He will say that he is just doing his job, almost like good soldiers say often when we commend them for their valor and bravery and service. But I'm glad that the Senate finally did its job just last night in confirming Ambassador Ford. Long overdue, by the way, but it was finally done. Ambassador Ford serves as a shining example of the best of our foreign service, the best that our foreign service has to offer to the world. Countries that have representatives remaining in Damascus should join Ambassador Ford on his visits with opposition figures and human rights activists around the country. He should not be the only one who bears witness to this horror. Other diplomats should join him on his travels throughout Syria. We've seen some positive developments among other countries in the international community. I want to acknowledge the increasingly positive role played by Turkey, which is reportedly considering sanctions against Syria. Turkey is Syria's largest trading partner, and sanctions could have a serious impact in Damascus. Turkey has also provided safe haven in border camps for more than 7,000 refugees that have fled from Syria to Turkey. Turkey's concrete support for the Syrian people, combined with ongoing diplomatic pressure, is a critical element in isolating the Syrian regime. Mr. President, we know some of the history here, and it's a history of a lot of horror and death. 29 years ago, Mr. Assad's father, Bashar al-Assad's father, unleashed the government security forces in the community Hama to repress unrest in that city. The killing that took place in February of 1982 was both indiscriminate and massive in its scale. Some estimate that as many as more than 10,000 Syrians were killed as security forces literally razed the city. Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, dedicated a chapter entitled, quote, Hama Rules, in his book From Beirut to Jerusalem, to the horror scene in this town in 1982. Assad's Hama Rules were meant to send a chilling effect to all who would dare to question the authority of that Assad regime. Mr. President, Bashar al-Assad has proven today, and certainly over the last several months, if not years, that he is incapable of reform. When faced with a democratic movement inspired by the wave of change sweeping across the region, the younger Assad responded with his own 2011 version of Hama rules. And as the world watched, as I said before, over 2,600 Syrians have been killed in a number of communities, whether it's in Hama or Homs, Rastan, Talbiseh, and several other towns across the country. Assad's rules seem to be focused on the use of militias who have been deployed most recently in Rastan to conduct the most repressive operations that we could think of. These gangs receive informal support from the Syrian security services and have been implicated in serious crimes and atrocities. The Syrian people have asked for international monitors to be deployed in the country in order to bear witness and perhaps to provide a deterrent against the wrath of these militias. Mr. President, in the intervening 29 years since the massacre at Hama, Syria has changed indeed. The Syrian people have shown that they will not be cowed by violence. The opposition has made remarkable progress. Hama rules no longer work in Syria. The opposition has stood up and voted with its feet every Friday, turning out to demonstrate and face the wrath, the terrible, deadly wrath of this regime. Moreover, scores of security forces have abandoned the regime and have come to the side of the opposition, something that did not happen in 1982 when the elder Assad brutally applied his Hama rules. In recent weeks, we've seen elements among the opposition emerge who have resorted to violence. One cannot blame the Syrian people for defending themselves in the face of unspeakable violence. But I do hope that though the aspirations of the Syrian people can be met through a commitment to nonviolence, as difficult as that is, and an understanding that democratic change comes not from the barrel of a gun, as we've often said on this floor, but the desire of all citizens to chart a new course, the course of peace. Mr. President, in summary, the international community can do more to support the Syrian people during this darkest of hours, starting right here in this chamber in the United States Senate. This week, we sent a strong message in confirming Ambassador Ford. Today, we can pass a resolution denouncing the behavior of the Syrian regime. More importantly, the international community can and should do more. Here are some of the measures that I believe should take place in the coming days and weeks. First, the United Nations has proven to not be, and I want to emphasize that, to not be the best international institution to address the strife in Syria. But key regional organizations could have a positive and substantial impact moving forward. The Arab League should suspend Syria's membership and call for President Assad to step down. The Gulf Cooperation Council should explicitly say that President Assad is no longer the legitimate leader of the country. Number two, concerned countries in the West should work together with the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries to establish an international, quote, Friends of the Syrian People, unquote, as a contact group for the region, which can serve as the main point of contact for the democratic opposition and the Syrian people. Participation in such a group would not necessarily limit the options of individual members and would not preclude bilateral efforts to take separate action in support of the Syrian people. It would, however, send a clear message of international solidarity in support of nonviolent change in Syria. Number three, the Syrian people have asked that international humanitarian observers be deployed in the country to monitor the situation and to perhaps serve as a deterrent against violence in the country. Similar to the OSCE human rights monitors deployed to Kosovo in 1998 to bear witness to the violence wrought by the Milosevic regime, this international team of monitors primarily composed of individuals from the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council, could address a central concern of the Syrian people and would be a welcome alternative to military intervention from the outside. Number 4, finally, key countries in the international community need to cut off commercial ties. Let me say that again. Cut off commercial ties with the Assad regime. The United States has done its part, as has the European Union. Turkey may announce new sanctions, but many countries continue to conduct business as usual with the Assad regime. For example, there are reports that India is considering the purchase of crude oil from Syria. The timing of such a purchase is ill-advised, and I hope, and we ask India, but we hope that India can look to identify other sources of energy in the region, especially at this time. Mr. President, the stakes have been raised in Syria like never before. The opposition is understandably tired and to some extent beaten down. And there is some despair that's starting to set in among the abused population of the country. At this critical time, the newly constituted Syrian National Council needs to be able to show the Syrian people that it can deliver results in the international community. The establishment of a Friends of Syria People group, a contact group, as I said before, and the deployment of international humanitarian monitors would demonstrate that the Syrian National Council is effective, and it would send a critical message to the Syrian people. Our options to leverage change in Syria are limited, but they do exist. We should be making every effort to build increased international pressure on and isolation of the Assad regime. Mr. Halak and his family and thousands of other families across Syria have suffered enough. They've suffered so much, and they deserve nothing less than our support, our solidarity, and our help in this dark hour. Mr. President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate is planning to vote tomorrow to limit debate on that China currency manipulation bill. They'll also vote on only allowing germane or relevant amendments to that legislation. Coming up after the Senate is out tonight, testimony from earlier today by Supreme Court Justices Antonin Scalia and Stephen Breyer on the constitutional role of judges. Then British Prime Minister David Cameron's speech to the Conservative Party's annual conference. And after that, a forum on the history of race relations in the U.S. All that's coming up after the Senate tonight. The Senate has been debating yesterday and today, and a vote to limit debate on legislation on China's currency manipulation is expected tomorrow that would allow sanctions against any country found to be holding its currency artificially low. A White House spokesman Jay Carney said today that while the administration is supportive of measures that pressure China to let its currency appreciate, the bill now under consideration here in the Senate, quote, raises concerns about consistency with our international obligations. Mr. Carney said that the White House is in discussions with Congress about the legislation, which the Senate, as we mentioned, is going to vote on tomorrow. As we wait for a senator to come to the floor to speak, former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin said today that she will not run for president. In a statement to supporters, she said that she and her husband Todd, quote, devote ourselves to God, family, and country, and her decision maintains that order. And in a roundup of some news items in National Journal, a source close to former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign says Mr. Romney's third quarter fundraising haul was expected to be more than $14 million, though the final figure was still to be tallied. And also, Representative Ron Paul of Texas raised $8 million during the third quarter for his campaign, proving that he's, quote, in the race for the long haul, even though he hasn't been able to break into the top tier of candidates in national polling. That from the National Journal. More work on the currency manipulation bill here in the Senate tomorrow. A couple of live events to tell you about happening on our companion network C-SPAN 3 tomorrow. The House Intelligence Committee is examining terrorist threats against the U.S., and we'll hear from FBI Director Robert Mueller and the head of the National Counterterrorism Center, Matthew Olson. That's happening at 10 a.m. Eastern. And at 2 p.m. Eastern, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner will outline the Financial Stability Oversight Council's annual report to the House Financial Services Committee. The Oversight Council was created by the Dodd-Frank financial bill. Some of what's happening on C-SPAN 3 tomorrow.
Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent to call the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent that we move to a period of morning business. Senators allowed to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to S-Res 287.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 287 designating October 2011 as Filipino-American History Month.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table, there be no intervening action or debate, and any statements relating to this matter be placed in the record at the appropriate place as if given.
Without objection.
I'm told that S-1660 is at the desk and due for its first reading.
Clerk will report.
S-1660, a bill to provide tax relief for American workers and businesses to put workers back on the job while rebuilding and modernizing America, and to provide pathways back to work for Americans looking for jobs.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, I ask for